Hello, Facebook Live and YouTube streaming. Welcome to Wine Cellars Wine Wednesday. I am coming at you live from Chicago, and I am Lee Schlussinger. I am the Vice President of Portfolio Management and Education at Wine Cellars, and it's been my privilege to be with you twice a week, bringing you these virtual tastings. This Wine Cellars Wine Wednesday, we will be going to rural France to taste wines under the label Mont Gravet, a brand that we have been working with for about a half dozen years or so. And it is a brand from people, our business partners who are negociants who help source, create, and brand these wines, the Master family. And again, we're going to be talking about families, the Sager family who own Wine Cellars and the Master family who own Master Wines, who bring you such great wines as XM, Mont Gravet, Tiamo, Les Charmel, Tortoise Creek, Kin and Cascadia. I think I hit all 7. Charlie will correct me later when he comes in. So we're going to be joined by Charlie Master, who is son of Mel Master. Most of you, a lot of you out there know Mel and Charlie. So we're going to have Charlie with us here today to talk about the background of Mont Gravet, the concept behind the wines, and how they came to be. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Charlie Master from his exotic vineyard home in the south of Maine. Charlie, buddy, how you doing from Maine?
Very good. Happy Wednesday. Happy hump day. Perfect day for a little happy hour wine, educational, fun, informative session here. Glad to be here, Lee. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your family and maybe how Mont Gravet came about, and we'll show some cool images and take everybody to illustrate the story.
I would love that. So Mont Gravet, which actually stands for hillside gravel or small stones, mountain gravel. These are all wines from the southern part of France. We wanted to make a wine that is a kind of everyday drinking wine, the kind of wine that we could drink Monday through Friday. So it's a great value. These wines pack a lot of quality into a very great value price point. They're all wines that are made with obscure grapes that are lesser known to the general public, but very well known to people that are passionate about wine. But it's a project that my father and I started we've been working with these same farmers since about 1998, 1999. So we've got great relationships. These are wonderful family members to us, just like our partners, the Sagers, who my father has worked with Yale since back in the 70s when they were importing du Boeuf from France. And we have since then partnered with them, the sons, Adam and Jordan, that are taking over for their father, as I am for my father. So we've kind of known each other since we were young lads. And I remember very clearly working side by side with Jordan and meeting him for some kind of marketing with sales guys way back in the early part of the 2000s. So really wonderful, wonderful family to work with. They bring something very important to the table, and my father brings something important to the table. And we kind of, just like wine, when you have the acidity and the tannins and all that kind of blended together to make a perfect product, that's what the Sager family and the Master family do with wine.
Got some balance there.
Definitely.
I think it's kind of fun, and I don't know how much of legend or how much of lore, but let's take a look at some images here and see if it rings true, the story, the myth behind the wines. Obviously, they are great values because they are lesser known grape varieties from underappreciated regions, but did they come about because of perhaps some travels through France that your father had done?
Very, very much so. I'm glad you asked, because all 3 of these wines, that's a great picture. This is one of our vignerons that we work with, one of the dear friends of my dad's, Tim Johnston. But we would go around into little cafes and restaurants exactly like the one you see in this picture that are in the countryside in the middle of nowhere in wonderful, beautiful southern parts of France. And we'd be traveling around these wine regions, just, tasting different wines from different farmers and different producers in these regions. But, in between the tastings, we'd go and have wonderful lunches and dinners. And in most of those occasions, we would have these wines that were served in little carafes. And they only had red, white, and rosé, and just 2 sizes of carafes. And these wines were absolutely incredible. And so my mother would go into the kitchen. She'd get to know the chef and sometimes have to pinch his bum just to get to find out the name of the farmer that sold them the wine. And then the next day we would go to that farm and we would ask that farmer if we could buy his total production and put it into our bottle with our label and bring it to America. And of course, most of those occasions, they'd be like, oh, America. Everybody wants to see their wines in America. I mean, that's where all the great, movies come from, and most of the good music, because, there is the UK with the Stones and Led Zeppelin. But, regardless, they're thrilled to see their wines, but they were always worried about dealing with alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, and, what kind of bottle and what kind of name and shape and all that, what kind of closure on the top. And we'd be, no. You guys just keep doing the amazing job that you're doing, being these passionate farmers, and we will buy your wine and put it into our bottles and bring it to America. And that's pretty much how all of our labels were created. But Mont Gravet was one of the first that we've been working with these farmers, like I said, since about 1999.
Yeah, that's the true definition of a negociant. So if anybody's curious, listen to what Charlie just told you in about a minute and a half. And it's a great definition of a negociant, somebody who helps commercialize wines that may not make it to market otherwise.
Yeah, this is a wonderful thing, because I think a lot of times these precious, amazing quality wines have never seen a glass bottle in their lives until we got our hands on them. So they were sold in bulk to the local restaurants in the areas where the vineyards were, basically. So we're very fortunate to have these great relationships. And like I said, a lot of these farmers now are like family to us. We've seen their children working in the vineyards back when they were very young. And now those children, just like Adam, Jordan, and myself, are taking over for their fathers and their mothers. And so there's a wonderful correlation there with the passion of food and wine and family. And so that's a big part of our industry.
Yeah, it sure is. Let's take a look at kind of the regionality of France, where these are our major growing regions. And we're going to focus today on these southern regions here. The first wine we'll have is outside of Toulouse in the southwest. Actually, I think we're going to be right down here in the Armagnac region, which is down here.
Yes, down close to a little town called Panjas, spelt Panjas with an S at the end. And this is in a region where they make Armagnac. And so this is a brandy. There's a picture, but I'll talk about that later. But that's but this beautiful town. My dad and I went there, and they have incredible white wines in this region. So traditionally, these wines are blended. They'll have Colombard mixed with Uni Blanc and Gros Mansang. And traditionally, this is kind of the blend of white wines from this region. There you go. You can see it perfectly right there. And we actually found this amazing 100% pure Colombard. And so if you smell this wine, it's not only got this amazing fragrant smell. I mean, it's got a little bit of white flower, but black currants or cassis, but also smells a little bit like pink grapefruit. And so I've done a couple blind tastings with this wine as the first wine of a dinner party at a wine dinner. And I've asked people what they think when they smell this wine. And a lot of people think it's got a little bit of that Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand smell going on, but it's not. This is Colombard, 100% pure, which, like I said, was pretty rare. But Colombard is a cousin of Chenin Blanc. And Chenin Blanc, that's a great picture there of the vineyards right there. And Chenin Blanc is one of those the grapes that is very rich and has lots of fruit and lots of acidity. And so Colombard is a cousin of Chenin Blanc. And Chenin Blanc is one of those wines that make grapes that makes Vouvray. And so this wine has that great structure, really great acidity. We harvest these grapes at night. And the reason we do that is because we don't want the grape fermentation to start. And so when you harvest the grapes at night, it's cold, and we leave the grapes cold and macerating for a 24-hour to 48-hour period. And that enables the grapes to kind of mild and get to know each other and get each other's favorite flavors from each other. And then we actually use the skin contact. We actually, during that time, the fermentation slowly starts. We do a very slow fermentation for this wine to get as much of the fruit from the fermentation process. And then one thing we do with this wine is we actually have the wine on the lees. So we leave the wine on the lees, on the dead yeast. So it gives this kind of richness to the wine, because these are wines that don't go through malolactic fermentation, where you're turning the mallow acid into lactic acid, which gives it that milky, rich viscosity. So this wine is very clean cut, refreshing, incredible with spicy foods. I mean, my favorite combination for this is like either Indian food or Asian foods, but it's incredible with oysters. It's also really good just by itself as an aperitif with some cheese. So because of the great acid and fruit in this wine, it's definitely a wine that goes with many different flavors and many different foods.
Yeah, I think if you liked Sauvignon Blanc, you would probably like this wine. It mimics a lot of the aromatic profile, but dry on the palate and really crisp, and great summer wine for sure, patio type of wine. Nothing to take too seriously. As you said, maybe a house white, right? I mean, that's what these wines were used for.
Exactly. And on the actual label here, you can see the Mont Gravet label has actually some stones on there. And most of these stones are round. And the reason that is because this area of France, you know, it's right on the base of the Pyrenees Mountains. So during the Ice Age, when you had, you know, a huge cap of ice on this continent, as it slowly melted off the continent of France, it made all these little rivers underneath the ice. And those rivers had nowhere to go when they were hitting the mountains. And so it made a lot of these pebbles round. Not only that, but it dumped tons of minerality from that glacier in this area, which is why this region has such great minerals in the wine. So it's a really great food wine for that aspect as well.
Yeah, lots of alluvial stones coming down from the Pyrenees during glacial melt.
Exactly.
Well, we jumped into this wine real quick. Do you want to say we'll move into the rosé, I guess, next? Do you want to say hi to some people from France that sent us a little?
I would love that. Yeah, I mean, I've got of course Cedric and Xavier, who are dear friends of ours. They are, like I said, family to us. And this is basically one of the farmer patrons, as they say, who owns several vineyards throughout the Languedoc, and then Xavier, who is his partner, that actually is the winemaker. So Xavier's family, he actually comes from a very prestigious family in Sancerre. His father is Max Roger, who makes one of the most prestigious Sancerres in the north of France, and so he actually partnered up with this farmer, and we've been making these wines for many years. And if we have that video, I think we have a video maybe of Xavier and Cedric saying hello to us.
Let's pull them into it. So you can see that these are the Cinsault vineyards for the rosé.
This is in the Corbière. Cinsault, my favorite grape, one of them anyway.
Bonjour les amis.
Ça va?
My name is Cedric.
My name is Xavier. I'm the winemaker for Mont Gravet.
We are the owner of Mont Gravet Vineyards, and today we are pleased to welcome you. We are in the middle of our vineyards here. You can see a lot of work to do.
So it's a grape for Mont Gravet Rosé. It's a Cinsault grape, the grape from Languedoc-Roussillon. So these days you can see the vineyard is growing. So we are in the big growing season, and we just have to take these little shoots off the vines, and we will wait for the crop. So as you can see, there is already some grapes. So this is the baby grapes of Cinsault for Mont Gravet.
Very important for the future quality. We are working on the 2020 vintage here. So as you can see, it's very promising. And if we do this work properly, we have a very nice wine, qualitative wine.
So we thank you very much for supporting us and drinking Mont Gravet for many years now. And we hope you are safe in America and staying away from this virus.
Yes, keep
Thanks
safe,
for
my
your
friends.
support.
Say
Bye-bye.
Merci, mon ami. Hein? Love those guys. These are such special people. Gosh, man, they are just so passionate about what they do. And I remember very vividly when I was young and getting into this business, and I went to work at Chateau Prairie Lachine from 1987 to 1990 for Alexis Lachine, who was a friend of my father's, who he met back in the 60s while he was writing a book at the same time as Alexis Lachine. And you meet these people in France that truly believe that they are producing the blood of Jesus Christ in some aspects. They really do believe that this is such an important product. I mean, there's parts of the Languedoc, there's a region called Fitou, and Saint-Chinian as well. And both of these regions make these really heavy, intense, strong red wines. And in the 1800s, they used to give patients in the hospital in Paris some of these wines to help revive them and give them the quality that they need, because they have such great tannins and acidity. It's actually very good for your body. So that's a good medical note there for the French people. They use wine in many different ways there.
We will caveat this that you do not have a medical degree, but I like your prescription.
Thank you. It is. I think there is something to be said about how healing wine can be if it's used correctly and not abused. So
it's funny you should mention that. We're going to taste. You're familiar with Dr. Tanish, one of our producers in Germany, in their Doctor Vineyard site, and we're going to talk about the story about how that vineyard site got the name Doctor on Saturday. So tune in this weekend to hear more about the medical benefits of wine dating back to the Middle Ages.
I will be there. I love that. That's one cool thing I love about the wine business is even if you're a 50-year-old man like me, who spent 4 years in Bordeaux learning about wine and have read hundreds of books about wine, you still know and realize that there is so much more to learn. And that's one of the reasons I think the wine industry is so exciting. It's very individual. It depends on the person drinking the product. But it's like some people like tall blondes, some people like short brunettes. It depends on the person. It's a very individual thing. And I think that makes this business very special. It's also ever changing. You can have one person on one side of the street producing a wine made with the same grape and the same soil as the guy on the other side of the street, but it'll taste totally different. So it depends on so many different factors, which is very interesting. So the rosé.
Well, let's take a look at the map, and we'll go down the Languedoc. We'll get out of the southwest of France and head towards the Mediterranean coast. We'll pull up some maps, and maybe we'll taste the rosé while we're doing that, and pull in an extra taster when we're there.
Can't wait. Surprise guests always make me excited.
So let's get back to our presentation here. So from our current slide, we will leave Gascony here and head down to the Languedoc. Carcassonne we mentioned, which is kind of the main city down there. You can see here. And the rosé comes from Corbière. I can't get
just below it. Just below Carcassonne is the Corbière.
Right. I think it comes from around here, if I got the map right.
You do. It's like in between Carcassonne and the Corbière, exactly. Yeah, and this is, I mean, there's also a great picture of Carcassonne. If you can throw that up. It's a beautiful medieval chateau. And so if you see this chateau, it looks like there's a chateau within a chateau within a chateau. And the reason that is because this first wall is from the 12th century. And this is an extremely old, medieval wall that goes around on the top of a hill, no less. And so very, incredible architecture. And then they built a chateau inside that. You can see the difference now. Then there's the red there. That's another chateau or,
wall.
That wall that was built in the 16th century. And then the main chateau in the very middle was built in the 17th century. So there's a lot of history here. It's actually completely worth going out of your way to visit this part of France if you have the time. Not only is it surrounded by vineyards and amazing wine, most of which is extremely affordable, they also have some really, really great high-end wines coming from this region now as well. But just a beautiful region to visit. And Carcassonne, it's actually a place where I lived for about 6 years back in my 20s. I lived close to Corbière. But this wine is made with a grape that actually has been produced in this region of France for many years. And the grape is called Sanso. And Sanso is one of the most, I think one of the most wonderful grapes because it's got this strawberry jam quality to it when it's made into wine. And it's also one of the grapes used to make Provence Rosé. So we do have a wine that we make in Provence as well. And this is one of the grapes that we blend into our Les Charmel Provence Rosé. But this is rare because you don't see Sanso, the grape, by itself, pure, very often. And if you do, it's usually a red wine. And so this wine is also harvested at night. And we do that for the same reason as we harvest the grapes from the Côte de Gascogne or Gascony. It's to keep them cold. And then we slowly start the fermentation. So we slowly raise the temperature. And then, of course, the yeast gets excited, finds the sugar, gets it. The byproduct is CO2 and alcohol. And during that whole process, only 24 hours is all we need for those skins to be into the game. And so out of 24 hours, we get this much beautiful pink color out of those grapes. And so the color of wine comes from the pigment of the skin. So you could, if you left this wine for another 2 days, it would be a really dark pink, almost like some rosés from Tavel or from Sancerre, which are colder climates and thicker skinned grapes as well, Cabernet Franc. But Sanso is just such a pretty wine. And when it's so light like this, after that 24 hours, we gently squeeze the grapes and take the remainder of the juice and finish the fermentation. It's about a 10-day slow fermentation. And this wine does have Lee contact as well, which is the yeast. And so the byproduct of winemaking, after the yeast eats the sugar, it dies and falls to the bottom of the tank. And they stir up the tank 3 or 4 times a day for about a 3-4 month period. And this wine, that gives the wine this kind of richness or this unctuous viscosity. And so that's why this wine, not only is it crisp and clean and refreshing, but it's got a richness to it as well. And without having oak, which is one of the reasons this wine is so refreshing and clean and approachable.
Well, we've got our special guest here that has the rosé as well. Let's get some thoughts from Mr. Adam Sager, who is my boss, co-president of Wine Cellars and the master business partner. So let's welcome, also from Illinois, Mr. Adam Sager. Adam, buddy, you there?
Hello. Hi,
Adam, happy Wednesday. It's really good to see you.
Happy Wednesday. You've left me in the green room for quite some time here. I've almost finished the entire bottle.
I saw you drinking back there. Don't drink all the wine in the green room.
Now, as you said, it's such an easy wine to drink and enjoy, and I've put down about a glass and a half already as I'm waiting to come on camera.
So our job is well done then.
Yes, it is. It is. I do have the Mont Gravet recently released 2019 vintage here.
Oh, the 19 even. I'm still drinking the 18.
Yeah, got the 19. I grabbed some sample bottles from the office when I was there yesterday, and so that I'm well stocked and well prepared.
I love that. And the one interesting thing about these wines is even if this wine is a year old, so I'm drinking the 2018. When when the wine gets a year old, it gets a little bit more rich and unctuous. It doesn't have as much fruit and tannin, but it's still really beautiful. These wines do last for about 18 months to 24 months. They do last longer, but they're best lived after about that time. So really exciting.
With Mont Gravet, the brand used to be just a one SKU item, starting with the Côte de Gascogne, as you guys just talked about. And the first vintage we released Mont Gravet Rosé was 2015 vintage. And we shipped that right towards the end of 2015, and it arrived into the market early part of 16. And that year, it instantly became the #1 SKU in the brand. We also released the red wine as well that year. And, overnight it outgrew the sales of the white wine. I think because of a lot of the things you touched on. It really over delivers for the money. It's a super high quality rosé. I think the fact that it's a single variety and a unique variety like Cinsault also creates kind of a very interesting angle in selling the wine and enjoying something new that a consumer might not have known you can even make rosé out of Cinsault, even though it is one of the blending grapes in a lot of the Rhone and Provence rosés.
Yeah, and like I mentioned before, those of you who were on before, the reason I mentioned that we've been making a couple of these wines since 1999 is because these wines were in a different label back in those days. So we have been working with those farmers for that period of time, but they were just in a different label.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing that makes these wines easy to try and easy to repeat and come back is that they're priced around $10. So if you've never heard of Cinsault, or you're not sure about the brand, or it's only a $10 investment, and as we said, the wines really over deliver, give us that rural France flavor profile, and keeps you coming back for more.
Even with the tariffs, unfortunate tariffs that we have on French wines right now, we're still able to keep this wine at a $10 price point. It's really really tremendous value. What would you eat with this, Charlie? What would you?
You know, it's funny you should ask that, because I actually made a dish tonight so that I can actually finish this bottle of wine once I'm done with this, because I had the white first, and then open the bottle of the rosé. And for me, especially this time of year, I've got these little tiny tomatoes that are coming out. I've got basil that has just started to come out as well. So I've taken tomatoes and basil and olive oil, salt and pepper, and I put those tomatoes cut in half in the oven at 200 degrees for about 3 hours. So it's almost making like sun-dried tomatoes, but they're not tough. They still are have the kind of gooiness that tomatoes have once they're really ripe. And I make that into a pasta. So it's just a very simple recipe. After I take those tomatoes out of the oven, I just mix it with some fresh pasta and some of the actual, water from the actual pasta being cooked. So it gives us some starch. But this is definitely a wine that goes with so many different things. Like I was saying about the white, I mean, even spicy food like Indian food or Mexican food or Asian food goes incredibly well with these wines, because they have good acid that can help up to some spice and some fat. And so if you have a dish like even roast chicken and roast potato,
we're doing chicken marsala tonight. I think we'll finish off this.
Perfect with that, yeah.
Pounded chicken breast marsala.
Yum! That sounds. God, I wish I was there.
Wild mushrooms.
Yeah,
you don't want to be in Chicago right now. I can tell you that.
Is it hot?
It's hot and humid, and there's nowhere to go.
No, but I've heard there's good restaurants that deliver, though.
There are some nice restaurants. Yes, definitely.
But yeah, this is definitely a wine that's for me, and my mom had something great to say about this wine. When we were in France, and we were having a dinner party, and I remember going up to my mom, and she's in the middle of cooking a dinner party for some of the vignerons that we work with, so these winemakers and farmers, and she had a teacup that she was drinking out of, and it was like 5 o'clock. We had dinner at 7. She had a couple hours, and it looked like rosehip tea. And so, like, Mom, what's in the teacup? She's like, that's Mont Gravet rosé, son. And so this wine is so good, you can drink it in a teacup. But yeah, no, this is one of those wines that goes with many, many different things. Like we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation, we wanted to make a wine that we, as passionate wine people, are comfortable drinking on an everyday basis. And when I say every day, I'm talking about 2 or 3 glasses of wine. So you don't have to drink the whole bottle, even though, in our family, it's very rare to have a bottle that's not finished. But like on the weekends, we taste, other wines. So it's a great everyday drinking wine. And I think Mont Gravet is also something that appeases, I think, a lot of different palates of people. Like I was saying earlier in our conversation, wine is a very individual thing. And some people like sweeter wines, some people like drier wines, and it depends on the food you're eating, the moment that you're in. Of course, Mont Gravet tastes really good on a beach in a picnic when it's sunny.
Our distribution is like 50-50 on-premise, off-premise. I mean, if restaurants were open, that is. And so it shows you that it's a really food-driven wine, because it's poured by the glass, and a lot of the throughout our channel of distribution.
Yeah, and having
as well as retail. So
yeah, and having just the small amount of skin contact. I mean, 24 hours. I believe my father called this wine rosé de une nuit at one point, which was rosé of one night, because it was pretty much only one night that the wine sat on the skins. And then after that, we did a very gentle press and took that juice and finished the fermentation. And I think that's why this wine has that, you can almost smell strawberry jam, raspberries. I always smell a little bit of white flour in this, but it also has a little bit of spice. And so you've got a little bit of like rhubarb that's been cooked in some vanilla or spice, but it's very palatable for a lot of different scenarios.
I sold it when I was a sales guy. I'd go out and I'd sell it as house wines. We sold it for banquets. You'd have a red, white, and a rosé that you could just go to. We sold it to hotels as their like house wines for happy hours and things like that, as well as restaurants if they just needed simple glass pour, a white, a red, and a rosé. So it's
rosé for simple palates and discerning palates.
Exactly.
Broad spectrum of consumers.
Yep.
Cool. Adam, do you want to stick around and go through the reds with us? You got time, or you need to disappear?
I probably got to bounce, but I can stick around for a couple seconds. Yeah.
All right. Well, we've been teasing that red wine for a while. I think there's a really cool story. Charlie, why don't you tell us a little bit about the story while I take us to the maps and we take a look at where it comes from and some images from those vineyards.
Yeah, so this is a really exciting wine. I mean, not a lot of people have heard of this grape if you're not, a winemaker or a passionate sommelier. Carignan, and the best way to pronounce this grape is, if you go on an airplane, you take carry-on luggage. And so if you say that word carry-on with a French accent, that's exactly how you pronounce this grape. And so the grape itself, the Carignan, is a blending grape, but it's just a really, really interesting grape because this grape produces lots of fruit when it's young. So it's very similar to a human. When this grape is young, it makes about a case of wine a year per plant. And so when it gets older, these are all over 50-year-old vines. It says vieilles vignes on the bottle, which means old vines in French. And some of these vines are actually between 80 and 120 years old, but the whole vineyard itself is over 50 years old. And it's kind of like me and my dad. So like I'm 50 and I do like about 7 things a day at like 60, 70% because I'm 50. My father is 70 and he does 2 things a day at 100% perfectly. And so, the older you get, the less you produce, but what you produce is much more focused and much higher quality. And so this grape, when it gets old like this, it produces a wine that smells like Côte du Rhône and tastes like Pinot Noir is the best way for me to describe this. So for me in the nose, it's got a little bit of that kind of prunes and plums and raisins, but it's also got this wonderful raspberry, cherry. And then when you taste it, the tannins are so delicate and elegant that this wine really is just so easy to drink and so palatable and comfortable. It's just a very soft, smooth, elegant style wine. And so this comes from an area called the Hérault Valley, which is in one of the northern parts of the Languedoc. So you can see that little red square on the top of that map, just under the word Languedoc. And so that's where these grapes are coming from. And this is kind of a very hot area, and Carignan thrives in very, very hot climates. And so this is actually perfect area for this grape.
Got some pictures of the old vines, the gnarled old vines with you and the Mel.
There you go. Look at me and my dad holding on to that vine. It's these, you could tell how gnarly these almost look like, these old tree. I mean, it's just amazing how beautiful these grapes can be. And of course, this is actually in the fall, so there's no leaves and no vegetation, but these vineyards are surrounded by all this, they call it garrigue in French. So you've got like wild vegetation growing between the vines. And like I said, it's fall in this picture, so it's hard to see some of that, but you got like lavender and wild fennel and thyme and rosemary and all these different things. And a lot of those things interact with the wine, or the grapes, I should say, the plant. And so that's why this wine has so many sophisticated flavors and smells and tastes, is because of this high elevation vineyard, the hot climate. Just like I was saying before with humans, plants are very much like us, and the more stress they go under, the more stress they go through, the more powerful and strong they become. So you can imagine if a vine doesn't get a lot of water, it gets stressed out, and it really it intensifies, and so the roots go deeper, and so because the roots go deeper, it extracts more minerals out of the soil, and so I think that's a very important thing. You know, the older we get, the better we are, and it's the same with a grapevine. So, but it doesn't produce a lot. This is a small yield, so we don't make a huge amount of this wine, but it is one of my favorite wines. And I also want to mention that this is one of the wines that I like to serve in my house cold. And you don't have to serve it cold, but it's got a wonderful, more fruitiness to it when it's served cold. Just a very crisp and clean. And this is also a wine that goes through about 4 to 5 months of oak aging, but only 50% of the wine goes through oak aging in this wine. And then the other thing that's interesting to know is this wine also goes through a lee contact. And so, you know, you get the dead yeast in there and it gives the wine this richness. And so you actually have that going on in this wine. So also something else that's important to point out is we do about 7 to 9 remontages a day when we're doing the fermentation of this wine. And that means the remontage is, that word means remounting. And so we take the wine out of the bottom of the cuvee or the bottom of the vat, and we squirt it back into the top of the vat. And so that wine falls and hits all the grapes that are floating on the top. And when the wine hits those grapes, it sometimes breaks the skin and enables some of that pigment to get out, which is why this wine has such a deep color. It's also one of the reasons this wine has a great tannins structure. But then that lee contact makes the wine have a richness. And so you don't have too much acidity and tannin. You've got this great balance of flavors going on. But this is also a perfect wine to bring to cork sniffing, I know everything about wine, sommelier blind tasting, because this is a very difficult wine to taste blind and say, I know what this is.
Yeah, Charlie, you threw out a lot of technical stuff here tonight. The remontage, we would call pump over.
Pump over, there you go.
Pump over. Yeah, that's a little bit
more words in French.
And, you know, those vines reminded me of, you know, we're here in the U.S., so a lot of us have not necessarily traveled to these regions, but what it reminds me of is my early days going out when I lived in California, going out and seeing old vines Zinfandel, these 80 to 100-year-old vines, and the same pruning, which is head pruning, meaning they're not wire trained, but they grow in goblet form, which is kind of an ancient way of how these vines were planted, you know, the turn of the century, last century.
Yeah, which is beautiful. And you're right. It does look like the old vine Zin. And it's got these, sometimes because they print it like that, it's got all these weird arms that come out. And some of them have 4 arms. Some of them have 6 arms. Some of them have 3. It depends on the plant in a lot of ways. But it's also very interesting that the soil in this area brings something to the table. You know, and I think for me in winemaking, the grape is the catalyst, or of like the actual thing that actually makes you taste something. And so,
yeah, the conduit to tasting the terroir. It's the
vehicle,
or
is what I was looking for. The vehicle to show off the terroir in the soil. And it's very interesting because this soil is ancient. I mean, there's lots of stuff going on here. When we first went into this vineyard, the actual owner of the vineyard took us into his little, he's got this little winemaking room outside of the cuvee where he's making the wine. And in there, he's got a little shelf. And on this shelf, he's got these old coins. They look like, I mean, they could be $1 million coins from like the Roman times. And he said the tractor guy found these while he was in the vineyards. And so you've got some serious stuff going on in the vineyards. And it's not just because of the coins. It's actually just because of the history of this area.
There's gold and then there are hills.
Yeah, there is gold in them hills. There's also good wine right in them hills.
This region is ancient. You know, everybody's come and settled there, and maybe the Romans, but even before then, there were Phoenicians that probably were there. And so wine growing in this area along that Mediterranean coastline goes back thousands and thousands of years. So there's a reason for it. You've got You've got access to the sea, which is kind of key, obviously, for settling. But the climate and conditions there are unique, and quite a bit of wine in France is made. It's one of the top 3 producing countries, and this is the largest. The Languedoc is the largest growing area, producing the most amount of wine. So there's a reason why we're getting good wines out of here. But since most people are looking to Burgundy, Bordeaux, or we talked about the Loire or Champagne, these other famous French regions, the Languedoc sometimes gets a little overlooked.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's one of the great things about what the Sagers and the Masters, us, are trying to accomplish here, is we're trying to bring otherwise lesser known, wonderful produced wines to the American market so that everybody can enjoy what we have been doing since we were younger.
Yeah, let's, speaking of which, I want to pull up a couple of comments. The first one is from Dad, he loved the video. So he wanted to say that was the best.
It was a great video.
And he also said he'll be over later because he wants the pasta.
You know, I got to show you guys something. I'll be right back.
All right. In the meantime, we'll take a look at some other stuff here. And we have somebody joining us from San Francisco.
This is what I was talking about. This is those slow roasted tomatoes with basil. You put in an oven at 200 degrees for 4 hours with some basil, olive oil, salt, and pepper. And that's what you get. And you just put this into a bowl of pasta. Magnifico. And you want to put like a little tablespoon of Mont Gravet rosé in there. It'll actually help the flavors going. Right
on. I actually, I got baked chicken in the oven right now, and I had a little bit of the Côte de Gascon white that I threw in there too. So I'm right there with you. Let's see some other friends. This guy seems to know you, Kevin from Denver.
Yeah, go Charlie. That's a great chef friend of mine. He's obviously enjoyed these wines under the best circumstances, which is with food and friends.
Perfect. Got some other friends joining us. Got somebody in here from Greater New York.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Brother from another mother.
Mr. Kenny Dane.
And Dane, and just gosh, what great moments we've had enjoying wine and food in the New York area.
And somebody from a fan from the Mid-Atlantic, Miss Christy.
Oh, seriously, are you really watching? I am so touched and flattered. I watch her presentations all the time, and she is one of my favorites. Wine lovers. We've spent time in France together. We've actually gone swimming outside of the actual region where we make our Provence rosé with customers, and just spent some amazing times together. Thank you so much, Christy. I love you. Can't wait to enjoy some food and wine instead of literally, like physically with you.
Go find her on Facebook, friend her, and go take a look at her video. She has great stuff that she's doing herself. So I'm surprised that she wants any more to do with virtual tastings, but thanks for joining us, Christy. It's good to see you. Catherine Kuntz, salute, Charles.
Yes, wonderful, passionate wine lover, friend of mine. Elle parle français très bien aussi.
Fantastic. So I think that we tasted all 3 wines. We talked about the regions. We talked about why we bring them to market, how we bring them to market, what they taste like, how much they cost, and where to find them. Just about everywhere, hopefully. An internet search normally pulls that up for you. Is there anything else you wanted to cover with us, Charlie, about Mont Gravet?
I just wanted to mention that, we do have a couple of great websites, the Master Wines website and the Wine Cellars website. Please go on those. We've got lots of great information about all of our wines, and we're doing virtual tastings, obviously, right now until such times as we're able to actually come and physically taste and enjoy with you. So please reach out to those websites and our YouTube channel, all that kind of good stuff, so we can know more about what we do. And I really want to say how important it is right now to stay safe and to stay healthy, of course, with a couple glasses of wine a day. That'll keep the doctor away. But yeah, thank you very much for your passionate interest in our wines. And Lee, as always, you have been a wonderful, wonderful colleague and brother from another mother, and I look forward to actually joining wine with you soon.
Yeah, well, for those of us that enjoyed talking with Charlie today, you'll be back, I think June 10th, we'll be talking about Les Charmel, and then I think you're coming back on just before the 4th of July on the 1st.
For Ti Amo love.
For Ti Amo. So come back and say hi to Charlie. We'll be back, as I mentioned earlier, tasting with Max Ferger from Dr. Tonish in the Mosel on Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern. So until then, Charlie, it was a pleasure talking with you as always. Love the energy, love the passion, and I love you too, buddy.
I love you tons. And of course, I love you, everybody in the wine world. Enjoy food and wine as much as you can, moderately.
Be safe out there, and we'll see you on Saturday.
Ti amo.
Ti amo.
Cheers, mate.